that the latter would be unquestioned and unquestionable, and this view appears to have governed the action of his successor. As Mr. Lincoln mentioned with just pride, Illinois was the first state to ratify the amendment. On December 18, 1865, Mr. Seward, who remained as Secretary of State in the cabinet of President Johnson, made official proclamation that the legislatures of 27 states, constituting 3/4 of the 36 states of the Union, had ratified the amendment, and that it had become valid as a part of the Constitution. 4 of the states constituting this number, Virginia, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Arkansas, were those whose reconstruction had been effected under the direction of President Lincoln. 6 more states subsequently ratified the amendment, Texas ending the list in February, 1870. The profound political transformation which the American Republic had undergone can perhaps best be measured by contrasting the 2 constitutional amendments which Congress made it the duty of the Lincoln administration to submit officially to the states. The first, signed by President Buchanan as one of his last official acts, and accepted and endorsed by Lincoln in his inaugural address, was in these words: "No amendment shall be made to the Constitution which will authorize or give to Congress the power to abolish or interfere within any State with the domestic institutions thereof, including that of persons held to labor or service by the laws of said State." Between Lincoln's inauguration and the outbreak of war, the Department of State transmitted this amendment to the several States for their action, and had the South shown a willingness to desist from secession and accept it as a peace offering, there is little doubt that it would have become a part of the Constitution. But the thunder of Beauregard's guns drove away all possibility of such a ratification, and within 4 years the Lincoln administration set forth the amendment of 1865, sweeping out of existence by one sentence the institution to which it had in its first proposal offered a virtual claim to perpetual recognition and tolerance. The new birth of freedom, which Lincoln invoked for the nation in his Gettysburg Address, was accomplished. The closing paragraphs of President Lincoln's message to Congress on December 6, 1864, were devoted to a summing up of the existing situation. The verdict of the ballot box had not only decided the continuance of a war administration and war policy, but renewed the assurance of a public sentiment to sustain its prosecution. Inspired by this majestic manifestation of the popular will, he was able to speak of the future with hope and confidence. But with characteristic prudence and good taste, he uttered no word of boasting, and indulged in no syllable of acrimony. On the contrary, in terms of fatherly kindness, he again offered the rebellious states the generous conditions he had previously tendered them. The national resources, then, are unexhausted, and, as we believe, inexhaustible. The public purpose to reestablish and maintain the national authority is unchanged, and, as we believe, unchangeable. The manner of continuing the effort remains to choose. On careful consideration of all the evidence accessible, it seems to me that no attempt at negotiation with the insurgent leader could result in any good. He would accept nothing short of severance of the Union, precisely what we will not and cannot give. His declarations to this effect are explicit and oft repeated. What is true, however, of him who heads the insurgent cause is not necessarily true of those who follow. Although he cannot re-accept the Union, they can. Some of them, we know, already desire peace and reunion. The number of such may increase. They can, at any moment, have peace simply by laying down their arms and submitting to the national authority under the Constitution. After so much, the government could not, if it would, maintain war against them. the loyal people would not sustain or allow it. If questions should remain, we would adjust them by the peaceful means of legislation, conference, courts, and votes, operating only in constitutional and lawful channels. In presenting the abandonment of armed resistance to the national authority, on the part of the insurgents, as the only indispensable condition to ending the war on the part of the government, I retract nothing heretofore said as to slavery. I repeat the declaration made a year ago that, while I remain in my present position, I shall not attempt to retract or modify the Emancipation Proclamation, nor shall I return to slavery any person who is free by the terms of that proclamation, or by any of the acts of Congress. If the people should, by whatever mode or means, make it an executive duty to reënslave such persons, another, and not I, must be their instrument to perform it. In stating a single condition of peace, I mean simply to say that the war will cease on the part of the government whenever it shall have ceased on the part of those who began it. The country was about to enter upon the 5th year of actual war, but all indications were pointing to a speedy collapse of the rebellion. This foreshadowed disaster to the Confederate armies gave rise to another volunteer peace negotiation, which, from the boldness of its animating thought and the prominence of its actors, assumes a special importance. The veteran politician, Francis P. Blair, Sr., who, from his long political and personal experience in Washington, knew, perhaps better than almost anyone else, the individual characters and tempers of Southern leaders, conceived that the time had come when he might take up the role of successful mediator between the North and the South. He gave various hints of his desire to President Lincoln, but received neither encouragement nor opportunity to unfold his plans. "Come to me after Savannah falls," was Lincoln's evasive reply. On the surrender of that city, Mr. Blair hastened to put his design into execution, and with a simple card from Mr. Lincoln, dated December 28, saying, "Allow the bearer, F. P. Blair, Sr., to pass our lines, go south, and return," as his only credential, set out for Richmond. From General Grant's camp he forwarded 2 letters to Jefferson Davis: one, a brief request to be allowed to go to Richmond in search of missing title papers presumably taken from his Maryland home during Early's raid; the other, a long letter, explaining the real object of his visit, but stating with the utmost candor that he came wholly unaccredited, save for permission to pass the lines, and that he had not offered the suggestions he wished to submit in person to Mr. Davis to any one in authority at Washington. After some delay he found himself in Richmond, and was accorded a confidential interview by the rebel president on January 12, 1865, when he unfolded his project, which proved to be nothing less than a proposition that the Union and Confederate armies cease fighting each other and unite to drive the French from Mexico. He supported this daring idea in a paper of some length, pointing out that as slavery, the real cause of the war, was hopelessly doomed, nothing now remained to keep the 2 sections of the country apart except the possible intervention of foreign soldiery. Hence, all considerations pointed to the wisdom of dislodging the French invaders from American soil, and thus baffling the designs of Napoleon to subject our Southern people to the Latin race. "He who expels the Bonaparte Habsburg dynasty from our southern flank," the paper said further, "will ally his name with those of Washington and Jackson as the defender of the liberty of the country. If in delivering Mexico he should model its states in form and principle to adapt them to our Union, and add a new southern constellations to its benignant sky while rounding off our possessions on the continent at the Isthmus, he would complete the work of Jefferson, who first set one foot of our colossal government on the Pacific by a stride from the Gulf of Mexico." I then said to him, "There is my problem.